what we're going to cover today. It has 4 parts. What are social indicator studies? A study we did called Clean Water in the Economy, the Elk River Chain of Lakes baseline survey, and then we'll finish up with the Lake Charlevoix survey that we've done over the last 10 years. So what are social indicator studies? These are formal processes that attempt to measure behavioral changes. They can be surveys, like in person, on the phone, by mail, on paper, or online. They could also be focus groups or individual interviews with people. But the 3 studies we're going to review today were done specifically to better understand what our members and the local officials and general public know about how to protect water and what concerns they have. So the point of this is to use what we find out to be more effective as we educate area residents and local governments and assist them in water protection efforts. So the social indicator system provides baseline data and measures changes in targeted audience behaviors. And the ones we concentrated on were attitudes, which are related to the willingness to adopt or change a practice; awareness, which basically measures what people know; and constraints. We looked at what limits they might have to adopting or changing practices for an individual or a community. And then, of course, behaviors are the actual practices. So we're going to start with the Clean Water and the Economy study that we did. So we had a loop here. The abundant clean water is why people come here. And this attraction actually results in pressure on clean water resources. So the more we grow, the more we have to make sure our water is clean because our economy really depends upon it. So for this study, we conducted a literature review to find existing studies connected to clean water and local economy, or connecting them. In 2014, we surveyed beachgoers in person in our 4-county service area of Antrim, Charlevoix, Emmett, and Sheboygan counties. And then in 2014 and 15, we carried out another survey online that targeted local business owners. So for the literature review, it focused mainly on tourism and property values. And the one thing I wanted to mention when I was talking about social indicator studies is there's also oversight for these studies. So some of you may have been familiar with something called an IRB, Internal Review Board, in college. That's an entity in most colleges and universities that have oversight for any experiments or surveys that are being done with human subjects. So there's a lot of oversight involved, and we have oversight on these studies as well. For this one, for Clean Water in the Economy, we worked with the Community Foundation. So for the literature review, we had a couple of college professors over at the local community college do a peer review of our work. So that was one way that we had oversight on this study. And then we did quality assurance project plans for the 2 surveys we did and presented those to the Community Foundation. And when we do the next 2 surveys that we talk about, those also had oversight from the EPA and EGLE. So on this literature review, as I said, it focused mainly on tourism and property values, and we found studies around the United States and in the Great Lakes region that clearly demonstrate that tourism and property values are directly impacted by water quality. So these are 2 really important points. They create jobs and benefit our local citizens. The literature review also noted in several points that water quality is threatened by development and stormwater runoff, in addition to shoreline development. So we already knew that, but it was good to document it. And our future surveys included questions about managing stormwater and any sensible shoreline development points. So when we did the beachgoer survey, we had interns go out to beaches in all 4 counties, and we did it the same weekend. So we gathered the same information across 4 counties on the same weekend. These were done in person with clipboards, and we were asking people who were enjoying the beaches just a few short questions. And we spoke to 95 people. We asked them where they're from, how far did they travel. On the spot, we asked them to rank the water quality at the beach on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being poor, 5 being excellent. And we came up with an average of 4.5. And then the final thing we asked them to consider was this statement. If the water quality at this beach were to decline due to bacterial contamination, algae, or other pollution problems, that would affect my decision to come to this beach. And you can see here 80% either agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. So we surveyed businesses, local businesses in all 4 of the counties. 61% also agreed that their business relies significantly, either indirectly or directly, on tourism. And the majority, an overwhelming majority, also feel that poor water quality would negatively affect property values and tourism, and therefore affect their business as well. 50% of the business owners said that their actions do have an impact on community water quality. And when we asked if they would be willing to change how they're managing stormwater runoff, 52% said they already use best management practices. We also call those BMPs, or they're willing to change current practices. So this is important. I mean, and you should remember too that not all businesses are downtown. Some of them are on or very near the water. So when we asked if developed shorelines generally reduce water quality, 51% of the businesses reported that they agreed with that. And they also understood that it's possible to develop shoreline properties and still protect water quality by using BMPs. So over 80% agreed or strongly agreed with that. So this is an example of where there's room to educate. You have over 80% of the audience agreeing that BMPs can help protect water quality at the shoreline, but you've got about 50% indicating that they need help or education on how to make that happen. And we published the results of these studies and incorporated the information that we learned into our educational and outreach efforts. And here's a screenshot of the flyer we created that's on our website. I know it's a terrible picture, sorry about that. But this is at watershedcouncil.org. And up here, if you clicked on our work, there would be a drop-down box for policy and advocacy. And this is located under policy and advocacy resources, and you can download that flyer or just, get a hold of me and I can send you a link to that. So now let's move to the Elk River Chain of Lakes watershed baseline survey. Here you have volunteers installing fish shelters in Lake Bel Air. That picture was taken back in 2014. So we surveyed local officials, shoreline property owners, and watershed residents, and we had to submit a quality assurance project plan to Eagle for all of these surveys before we got approval to do them. So our methodology for this baseline survey and the one that you're going to see later about Charlevoix, they both use the same methodology called a 5-wave design. In this method, a pre-survey letter is mailed first, and 1 week later, the survey with a cover letter and self-addressed stamped envelope is sent. A reminder postcard is mailed 2 weeks after the first mailing to anyone who hasn't responded. And then a second survey with a cover letter and self-addressed stamped envelope is sent to non-respondents 2 weeks after the postcard reminder. Then you have a final reminder letter sent to those who have not responded 2 weeks after the second survey. And then so respondents are not sent duplicate surveys. We have a tracking number on the corner, and when a survey is returned, the number's cut off the survey and separated, which ensures that the tracking number and survey answers can be entered without being able to associate any survey response to any individual. So for this baseline survey, we had all three groups come up with some similar conclusions. All three believe that the quality of the water is good. There are few impairments. The economy depends on that good water quality. They don't think it's okay to reduce quality to promote economic development, and that their quality of life actually depends on good water. 83%, you can see here, of watershed residents and 92% of the officials either agreed or strongly agreed that it's important to protect water quality, even if it slows economic development. And the operative word here is slow, not stop. You know, the idea is that if a proposal is brought forth and there are concerns about it, or there's maybe ways to improve it, then if we have to slow it down and have a few more meetings to make that happen, then so be it. But the idea is that water quality of life and economic stability in the watershed depends on good water quality, and local officials and residents agree with that. So it's really worthwhile to reach out with water protection proposals and educational efforts. Over 80%, you can see here, of the watershed residents agree that they have a personal responsibility to protect water quality. So this makes it worthwhile to reach out. They strongly agree that how they care for their lawn and yard can affect water quality. And they also support and are willing to change their practices, their personal land management practices, to improve water quality. So this was a good survey in terms of response rates and information shared. It created a baseline so that future surveys can follow up and measure change after some outreach and education takes place, with the release of a brand new watershed management plan for this Elk River Chain of Lakes watershed. So that brings us to Charlevoix, Lake Charlevoix Watershed. We did baseline surveys in 2010 and repeated them in 2020 to measure any changes after we specifically implemented projects based on feedback we got from the first series of surveys. Let me look at the return rates here with you. So you can see that this was basically a 10-year period. So we surveyed watershed residents in August through October of 2010, and then 10 years later came back, June through September of 2020. The original set of surveys, all three of them, you will see we had high or very high returns that beat all of our expectations. The watershed resident survey in 2020 was cut in half in terms of return rate, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that. Local officials, we did April through June of 2011, and then followed that up April through June in 2019, not quite 10 years later. Very high return rate on the first one, and 46% return was right within our targeted range, and that was a good return for us there. So on the shoreline property owners, we first surveyed August through October of 2011, and then came back July through September of 19. Same pattern, 59% return, very high on the first one, and a good return on the second one. It was right within, again, our target ranges. So as you can see, this was cut in half here for the watershed residents. We're not really sure why, but we speculated about two points. First of all, the list that we had for the watershed residents did seem to have more bad addresses than the other list that we were using, and we weren't sure why. This is only anecdotal because unfortunately we don't have access to the bad addresses from 2010. We just have what was actually sent, what was successfully mailed out. In 2020, we have not only what was successfully mailed out, but we also have the bad addresses. So if we had bad addresses for 2010, then we could, see if there was a difference in the list, but we're just suspecting that at this point. The other point, though, is we think that COVID-19 might have had some impact. The local officials and shoreline surveys were both conducted in 2019 for the second series. but the watershed residence was conducted during the pandemic and the return rate was very low. So those are some reasons why we think that might have happened. So in 2011, one of the items least familiar to local officials was something called coordinating water quality zoning provisions with neighboring communities. And the reason we cared about this is because we're talking about Lake Charlevoix, which has several townships surrounding it. I think there's at least 8, I forget how many now, but 8 or 10 townships surrounding the entire lake. So if one township goes forward and puts forth water protection efforts, and the townships on the either side of them are not doing the same, it's less effective than if the townships would coordinate their actions and work together. So that's what we found out in 2011. And in response to them not knowing how to do this, Michigan State University Extension, Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council, and LIA, the Land Information Access Association down in Traverse City, the 3 of us partnered. And in the intervening years, we held regular zoning administrator meetings for them to talk about common problems, enforcement issues, and how to coordinate with one another when they were doing protections. So when we went back and surveyed in 2019, knowing how to coordinate water quality provisions with neighboring communities increased 10 points, with 33% saying they now know how to use this. So this is an example of measurable change from addressing challenges identified in 2011, going out and doing something about it, and then resurveying. So this supports additional education to help communities coordinate efforts to protect shared water bodies. The other thing that local officials had some measurable change on was their knowledge of rain gardens, which increased 7 points from 23 to 30%. This likely reflects the recent stormwater runoff education and green infrastructure projects and restoration projects in the watershed. And a component of those projects was to reach out to local officials first to inform them and get support. And then now we're in the process of doing some of that work, but we were working directly with local officials. And we believe that that is what helped increase this knowledge of rain gardens and give us the measurable change. Their knowledge of vegetated buffers, also called green belts, also increased for local officials, a 9-point increase from 56% to 65%. And since that original survey, the Michigan Natural Shoreline Partnership was created. And in the intervening years between the 2 surveys, the Shoreline Partnership disseminated educational materials, held workshops and training sessions, and incentive programs for shoreline property owners. So we believe that this was influential in the measurable change we were able to see here for local officials. And then on shoreline property owners and watershed residents, they indicated also that they were willing to make changes to their lawn and garden practices, like we saw in the Elk River survey. They also perceived few limitations in doing so. And the limitations were related to not knowing how to do something. So education programs targeting homeowners really should concentrate on information, skills, and demonstrations, workshops and demonstrations of specific projects. And then finally, on septic systems, some of you may be aware of our efforts to work on septic systems over the few years we've, well, it's been about 5-6 years, I guess. So in 2020, when we surveyed watershed residents, their responses related to pumping septic system tanks showed a 14% increase. So 71% reported in 2020 that they pump them regularly. In the 2019 Shoreline Property Owner Follow-Up Survey, we had a 12-point increase where 82% regularly pump their septic system. So the survey results indicate that at least the message to pump your septic tank regularly has been getting through to property owners as demonstrated by this measurable change. So these efforts on septic system education should definitely be continued. And this is another bad screenshot of our website, but if you want to see the results for the Elk River Chain of Lakes survey or the Lake Charlevoix survey, if you go to our waters up here, there's a drop-down box on the website that will take you to what it says watersheds, and you can go to each of those and go to the committee pages. But we've basically got here for Lake Charlevoix, we have a report that summarizes all 3 surveys. We have a short fact sheet, and then we do a deep dive into each of the individual surveys. And these also show the original data, the raw data collected that we used for our analysis. So again, 1,000 apologies for making you wait so long to get started. We don't have as much time, but we have some time, I believe, to do some questions.
Thank you, Grenetta. That was great. And just for those who don't know, I'm Jennifer McKay. I'm the policy director at the Watershed Council, and I will be facilitating questions today. And as a reminder, for those of you who would like to ask questions, you can put them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And Grenetta, if you want to pop back on your video so people can see you and stop sharing your screen. Perfect. So we do have a few questions that have come in. And so the first one is 52% already using BMPs is terrific. Do you know what the most common BMPs are? And is their work published somewhere? And you're muted.
It depends. It was a 4-county service area, so I would have to refer back to see what the specific BMPs were that they were using. But what we did if I recall the question correctly, what we did was we gave examples of what best management practices were. So for if you're on a slope and you have impervious surfaces in front of your shop or your area, that where the rainwater could maybe just run off, then we suggested maybe some plantings if they could be done. And some of the engagement we got into after the survey was done, people contacted us who were actually businesses working on the shoreline, and they talked to us about green belts. Those were the 2 key things: runoff on a slope surface that I recall, and green belts that we had as follow-up questions.
Great. Did your literature research reveal any qualitative data relating water quality to property values?
Yeah, and I can make that literature review available to you. Of course, we have copies of it, and anybody that's interested in reading it, well, I can definitely share it with you.
Can we provide that link in the follow-up email to those that are attending the presentation?
It's not online. It would be an actual document that I would email and share with individuals that are interested in seeing it.
Okay, so I know who asked this question, so we can be sure to get that information to you.
Yes.
Another question is, what is the timeline for regularly pumping septic systems?
Well, we like to refer to a table that was published by Michigan State University Extension. They have a really great website devoted to septic maintenance, and that includes a table And it shows, like on one end of the table, it shows how many people live in your household. And at the top, it shows what size tank you have. So for me personally, when I use that table, I'm one person living in a household with 1,000-gallon tank. And when you come down to it, it says I should pump every 12 years. And that gives you a good idea. We don't want people to pump too often if they're not using their septic tank, because there's beneficial bugs in there that we don't want to clean out. We want to let them do their work. So pumping too frequently could be a problem as well. So we always refer folks to that excellent table by Michigan State University and have them refer to that. And then I also have that table recreated in all of our septic question reports. Those are all online on our septic question page, and they have that table included in all 4 of them. There's one for each of our counties.
Okay, so they can find that table on our website, and then where else could they find that table?
No, they could find it on our website in the septic question reports if they download that, or they just have to go to the MSU extension, just Google MSU extension septic, and it'll get you right to that page, and that table is available. They have, I always do shameless promotion of MSU Extension's website on septic, because they have such great resources there, and they do a really good job.
Great. So of what value to lake associations would be a project that used similar social indicator survey?
Well, I would ask lake associations to read my reports, because my reports give ideas about certain topics. So like if shoreline property owners are having difficulty with something, then we do recommendations in the reports where we say educational or outreach programs should emphasize this, this, and this. So for example, the surveys in Lake Charlevoix and Elk River Channel Lakes focused on practices, best management practices, like how do you know how to do this, or are you familiar with that? And from the results of the survey, we could see what are most important to folks, and we could emphasize that in our educational efforts. So like for one question that comes to mind right away is what's most important to you in terms of water resources? And they would say things like swimming, boating, fishing, picnicking with the family, that type of thing. So when we would tease out those responses, then we would have a group of responses that were quite popular. And so we thought if you frame your educational efforts with, for examples that had boating as one of their main things. So your educational outreach should feature boating, because that's something that's going to, indicate interest with the whatever population or audience you were talking to. So all of the reports go into great detail about how you could use this information in educational and outreach efforts specifically.
Perfect. Do you have a success story of townships working together to create common water quality ordinances?
Well, I have a project that was done by by Leah and us and MSU Extension and the Lake Charlevoix Association. We all teamed up and we had lots of meetings on that point about coordinating efforts. And we created a website, lakecharlevoixprotection.org. And on that website, it shares all the water related issues and what each township around Lake Charlevoix does. So after we did these surveys, we did these events, and we had like one side of the lake would meet and talk about common interests, and the other side of the lake would meet and talk about common interests and problems. And we compiled all that information from those meetings onto this Lake Charlevoix protection website. And it's a really great resource. And what the local government entities, what the local government officials wanted to do was they wanted to be able to see what other townships are doing or not doing when they were considering new ordinances on their on a similar topic. So if they felt like the protection that they were considering was significantly weaker than what they see their neighbors doing, then they had a reason to discuss maybe strengthening it, and vice versa. You know, if they thought something was too prohibitive, they could refer to what neighbors were doing successfully and adapt to that. So that's the first success story that comes to mind, but there have been a lot. We really took a lot of pains to hear what in Lake Charlevoix, which was the first one that we did of this kind of survey series, we really took a lot of pain to read what local officials were saying and then do educational programs directed at what their concerns were. And we saw then the measurable change in the survey 10 years later. So that was the point of it. It was to hear what they were saying, you know, do something about it, and then see if we could measure a change as a result. But if anybody wants to talk to me about any of these ideas, feel free, you know, shoot me an email. We can have a phone call or a Zoom call, you know, whatever you want.
Great. And a reminder that anyone who wants to submit a question, you can do so by putting it in the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen. Grenetta, do you want to remind people how they can get in touch with you if they have any follow-up questions or would like more additional information?
Absolutely. So feel free to use my cell phone as we work remotely. And that number is 231-838-5193. And my email is my first name, Grenetta, Grenetta, at watershedcouncil.org. And I'm always happy to hear from you.
Great. And not seeing any other questions at this time. Oh, wait, we do have another one. Do you ever need volunteers or help with conducting these surveys?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Do you ever need volunteers or help with conducting these surveys?
Not at the moment, but yes. The beachgoer survey, for example, was done by interns that summer. And we had a lot of interns that summer. I think that was the year we had 8 for different, because we had so many projects going on. But yeah, I don't have anything planned at the moment for surveys upcoming, but I'm sure that if you're interested in doing a survey of a certain population and you would like to volunteer to do that, I could help you create that and make that happen.
And if anyone is interested in volunteering with Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council, you can always reach out to our office and contact Natalie. Our main office number is 231-347-1181. We're always looking for volunteers to assist us with various activities. Grenetta, any last thoughts before we close out today's icebreaker?
No, well, first of all, 1,000 apologies for making you wait. I don't know what happened. I'm talking to you from my office now, but I had moved into my dining room so that I had a better background than all the craziness you see behind me. And for some reason, my internet just went out just completely. And even when I moved back in here into my office, I had a hard time connecting. So 1,000 apologies. I have no idea why that happened. So thank you for your patience and for waiting. But yeah, I just encourage you to look at the website and the studies. And if you have any questions about any of them, reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk about this. I could really talk about these things for hours, seriously. I mean, just the Urkel baseline survey alone has so much connected to it that we could talk it over for a long time. So, and the same with the others, you know, so thank you so much for your patience and for attending today.
Oh, great. Again, thank you for attending our icebreaker series, and again for your patience. We appreciate you attending and listening, and feel free to contact the Watershed Council for this or any other ways we can assist you in the future. And with that, I will say have a wonderful day and thank you.